The Patek Philippe, on Julian Croft's wrist, ticked softly like it was counting the heartbeats of a man who no longer felt anything. In the glass-wrapped penthouse office atop Croft Tower, where Manhattan stretched below like a billion-dollar map, everything was immaculate: walnut floors, Italian leather sofas, LED lights casting sharp shadows across the marble conference table. He brushed a non-existent crease from his Tom Ford suit and adjusted his tie, not because he needed to, just out of habit, like a soldier guarding a kingdom already crumbling. On the 4K screen in front of him, the revenue chart for Aurelia's on Grand, the flagship restaurant of the empire, founded by his grandmother, was in free fall. Julian blinked, not out of surprise, but from the blow. Beside the graph was an excerpt from a New York Times review. Aurelia Croft built an empire with her soul. Her grandson seems to be selling it off for the cheapest price. His chest tightened, not from shame, from the name Aurelia. A faint scent surfaced in his memory: garlic, sizzling basil, and tomato sauce simmering on the stove. Fragmented memories, her ringing laughter flower all over his tiny hands, her wrinkled but warm hand on his shoulder as she said, "Julian, our recipe isn't just tomatoes and basil. It's love. It's memory. Never sell. It's sold cheap." He had laughed then, called it sentimental nonsense that had no place on a balance sheet. Now it was the numbers themselves that betrayed him. No, they screamed at him that he was wrong. Optimized supply chain. Ingredient costs down 18%. Net profit steady. Yet Lasagna di Aurelia, once a symbol of legacy, was now called soulless. Julian stood, no longer a CEO, no longer an heir, just a man haunted by a truth buried beneath formulas and Excel sheets. He opened his laptop and booked a dinner reservation under a fake name, Alex Chen, a food blogger. Tomorrow, he would walk into that restaurant himself, not to eat, but to find out who or what had killed his grandmother's soul. The glass door of Aurelia's on Grand opened with a soft ding, a sound engineered to perfection, like everything else in this place. Julian stepped in, with slightly tousled hair, a worn-out khaki jacket, and cheap round glasses. No trace of a multi-million-dollar CEO. Just Alex Chen, a food blogger with a few thousand followers and a genuine passion for pasta. The restaurant still sparkled. Italian chandeliers, hung high above polished oak tables, gleamed without a single scratch, and the staff moved in perfect symmetry like models from a catalogue. But the air felt cold, invisible but cold. The waiter handed him a menu with a voice flat as an AI, a smile pasted on like a sticker. Julian glanced around diners eating in silence. Eyes on phones, not on each other. A family of 4 sat quietly, the youngest child pushing his pasta plate away. No tears, no fuss, just a stare, as if the world had disappointed him one more time. Julian tightened his grip on the notepad in his hand. The lasagna di Aurelia arrived, cheese-melted, perfectly aroma enticing. But from the first bite, Julian knew it followed the recipe. But it had no soul. He scribbled, "Still lasagna. But it's a robotic replica, so perfect it's numb." His eyes drifted toward the open kitchen. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood there, apron singed and worn. No yelling, no theatrics like Gordon Ramsay. Just working. Silent, like a soldier, guarding the last flame. Julian saw him, Leo Vance, bend over a pot of freshly boiled pasta. He didn't just glance. He lifted a strand under the light, pressed it, gently sniffed, then dumped the entire batch into the trash. A sharp thud. The manager rushed over, visibly tense. Leo shook his head, said nothing. The manager backed off. No argument, no question. Julian typed fast, dominant head chef. Wasteful behavior, the possible root of the issue. All early signs pointed in one direction. Leo Vance was the problem. But when Julian turned to look at the child again, the boy was hunched over, tracing messy spirals onto a napkin with his wet finger over and over. The red sauce had smeared across his shirt like blood. Something was wrong in this place. Julian didn't know what it was, but he made a decision. He would stay, observe, and follow the trail. Leo seemed strange today, Julian said, casually standing by the bar. The young server, with soft curls and a polishing cloth in hand, raised an eyebrow with a faint smile, then shook her head gently. Leo, he used to be the warmest person here. Julian blinked. Really, she nodded, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. He always left on time to read bedtime stories to his daughter, always smiled when he talked about her. But these past few months, her voice trailed off. A moment of hesitation. Then she leaned in and whispered, as if afraid of the weight her words might carry. His daughter's seriously ill. He practically lives in the kitchen now. Everyone knows, but no one dares to ask. Julian said nothing, just nodded, thanked her, and walked out of the restaurant. But instead of heading back to the hotel, he circled back in secret. The micro camera was hidden behind the spice box near the open kitchen. He checked it again, the lens aimed precisely at the corner of the prep table where Leo usually worked. That night, Julian stayed awake. The laptop screen glowed in a room swallowed by darkness. 3 a.m. The kitchen was empty. Then Leo appeared. No apron, just a plain t-shirt and worn pants. He carried a thick, weathered notebook. Placing it on the table, he opened it. What followed was science. No knives, no pans. Instead, a digital scale laser thermometer and precision pipettes. Leo measured every gram of flour and every milliliter of olive oil as if concocting an antidote. The sauce was simmered to an exact temperature and then tested for pH balance. Julian whispered to himself, "What is he doing?" Leo didn't taste anything. He took photos of the pasta from 3 angles and wrote down every detail: noodle thickness, sauce, adhesion, evaporation time. The final footage stunned Julian. Leo stood, lifted the nearly flawless pasta dish, and dumped it straight into the trash. No pause, no hesitation. The sound of pasta sliding off the plate and hitting the bottom of the metal bin echoed through the night. Julian sat frozen in the dark, the screen frozen on that final frame. Leo hunched over, both hands on the table as if praying, or fighting a pain too deep to name. Why, that question wrapped itself around Julian's chest like barbed wire. He was no longer sure Leo was the problem. But one thing was undeniable. Leo was hiding something, and it wasn't just about food. It was about survival. Julian couldn't sleep a wink that night. The image of the flawless pasta dish sliding into the trash looped in his mind like a broken reel. Not because of the waste, but because of the kind of devotion that bordered on despair. The next morning, he returned to the restaurant earlier than usual, before the morning shift had even begun. Leo was outside, near the emergency exit, speaking on the phone in a low but urgent voice. Julian seized the moment and slipped into the staff locker room. The air carried faint traces of sweat, olive oil, and flour. Leo's locker was unlocked. Carelessness or exhaustion. Julian opened it. His heart pounded like a ticking countdown. Inside, a thick, dog-eared notebook, worn down from overuse. He flipped it open. The first page contained a sauce recipe timed down to the second. But the pages that followed were something else entirely. Medical terminology, chemical diagrams, printed articles about autoimmune reactions. In the middle, scrawled across the page, K7, Atos, the cause. Julian froze. Compound K7. A cheap preservative he had approved 6 months ago extended the sauce's shelf life by 3 weeks and saved the company millions annually. A flashback struck like a slap. Julian sitting in his office, flipping through the memo, signing it without reading it thoroughly. A lazy nod to the COO, if the numbers check out, do it. Nausea climbed his throat. He returned to the notebook. Tucked between the densely scribbled pages was something light, yet it stabbed like a knife. An old photograph. A girl maybe 8 years old, with curly hair, and a beaming grin, tomato sauce smeared around her mouth. On the back, a handwritten note, Chloe. The smile before the storm. Julian gripped the photo. His hands trembled. That night he followed Leo after his shift. No trip home. Leo drove through quiet suburban streets and stopped in front of a modest white building. The sign out front read, St. Jude Children's Palliative Care Center. Julian didn't get out. He stayed in his car watching. Leo retrieved a small thermal container from the back seat, holding it with both hands like something sacred, and walked through a side entrance. A nurse met him. No questions, no paperwork, just a nod. Gentle, knowing. Leo handed her the container and bowed his head. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Everything Julian needed to know was clear. K7 wasn't just a bad business call. It had made a little girl unable to eat the last meal she loved. And Julian was the one who had signed her death sentence. Rain poured down in sheets as Julian parked his car across from St. Jude Care Center. The cold wind bit into his skin, but all he could feel was the emptiness in his chest. Leo stepped out, coat-soaked hair dripping over his forehead. He stopped when he saw Julian standing under the dim glow of a street lamp. Leo. Julian called, his voice catching. Leo's eyes narrowed, cautious, but he didn't walk away. We need to talk. Leo glanced around, then nodded toward his car. Get in. For the first few minutes, no one spoke. Just the steady rhythm of rain on the roof and the slow swish of the windshield wipers. Finally, Julian broke the silence. I know about the source and about Chloe. Leo didn't look at him, just sighed a deep, hollow sigh, like the anger had long since burned out. Julian asked, Why didn't you tell anyone? Leo pulled out his wallet and took out a small photo, the same one Julian had seen in the notebook. He handed it over, hands wet but steady. This is Chloe. The only thing she still wanted to eat was Aurelia's lasagna. His voice cracked, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the air. The first time she tried the new recipe, she vomited all night. The second time, her body reacted like she'd been poisoned. He paused, eyes closed, as if reliving the nightmare. The doctor was clear, K7. That compound shattered what little immunity she had left. And I know who signed off on it. Leo turned toward him, eyes red but dry. There were no tears, only a quiet rage that had burned for months. You didn't just change a recipe. You took away the last thing that could make my daughter smile. From the glove compartment, he retrieved a small glass jar and placed it in Julian's hands. The lid was sealed tight. Inside was a deep red sauce, thick and fragrant with garlic and basil. This is what I make every night. Every drop, every ingredient, tasted like I'm crafting an antidote. Julian gripped the jar tightly. It was small, yet unbearably heavy. Leo's voice dropped, almost a whisper. That's the soul you sold, to save a few cents. The car fell silent again, but in that silence, Julian understood he was no longer a CEO, no longer the head of an empire. He was a man standing before the verdict of his own conscience. Back at the hotel, Julian placed the glass jar on the table, like it was some sacred relic. He unscrewed the lid slowly, and the aroma filled the room. It wasn't just sauce. It was a memory. It was Aurelia singing in the tiny Little Italy kitchen. Her hand rested gently on his head. Winter nights by the window, slurping pasta and laughing until their stomachs hurt. He brought a spoon to his lips. The first taste was the sweet tart burst of San Marzano tomatoes, but then like a symphony unfurling after a quiet prelude came layers of flavor, fresh basil caramelized shallots, a touch of heat from cracked black pepper. But more than all that was love. Julian broke down. No sobs, just silent tears spilling onto the table. The next morning, he walked into the executive boardroom. No laptop, no charts, just the glass jar and a photo of Chloe. The room fell into absolute silence as he placed both on the table. "This is everything we traded away," Julian said, voice low but resonant. "We optimized the supply chain, cut costs, and boosted profits. And this is the result." He held up the photo. A little girl with tomato sauce around her mouth beaming. A smile that vanished because of a decision made on paper. The chief legal officer spoke up, cautious. "Julian, this is complicated. We have obligations to shareholders, to PR, to legal." Julian slammed his hand on the table. A sharp thud shook the glass. "Legal? What about morals? What do we sell here, pasta? No, we sell trust. And right now, we're selling a lie." The CFO muttered, "How do you even know that sauce is the original recipe?" Julian turned to him, eyes blazing. "Because I tasted it. And I remember. I remember my grandmother. I remember why this empire exists. Not for margins, but because it made people feel loved." He pointed at Chloe's photo. "We could make a few million more, or we could give a child one more chance to smile before. There are no chances left." He looked at each person in the room. Slowly. Deeply. No threat, just truth. "Choose," he said, voice even as judgment. "These numbers or that smile." And then he said one last thing before walking out. "Either we go back to the original recipe, or I resign, and I tell the whole world the truth." The air in the boardroom was thick, like wet cement that hadn't fully set. Board members glanced at one another, then at the jar of sauce still sitting on the table beside Chloe's photo. No one touched it, but its weight rendered every laptop and financial report meaningless. The vote was silent. Each yes landed like the sound of nails sealing the coffin of the optimized recipe that had killed Aurelia's soul. The result? Approved. The original recipe was reinstated. Compound K7 has been permanently discontinued, effective immediately. Julian left the meeting not with triumph, but like a man who had just walked out of a storm. He called Leo right away. "I've got good news," Julian said. "We're going back to the old recipe. No more preservatives. No more pretending." On the other end of the line, silence. Then Leo replied, calm, as if discussing the weather. "Thank you, Mr. Croft, but I don't need your praise." Julian smiled. "I have something else. An offer, a seat on the board. Vice President of Heritage and Quality, triple your current salary, private office, private driver." This time, Leo chuckled softly. "No, sir. My place isn't up there. It's next to the fire. Where the truth is made, not where it's distorted by PowerPoint." Julian was quiet. He understood, and he respected it. Leo continued, voice firmer now. "I only need one promise from you. Name it. Create a fund. Call it Aurelia's Promise. Serve clean, healthy meals to kids like Chloe, kids who are fighting every day and deserve food that's safe and cooked with love." Julian nodded, though Leo couldn't see it. "Deal," he said. "We start today." Leo answered with just one simple sentence. "Then I'll keep cooking. No contracts, no handshakes, just respect between two men who once stood on opposite sides, now united by a mission." One would guard the flame from the boardroom. The other would keep it burning in the kitchen. 6 months later, Aurelia's on Grand wasn't just saved, it was reborn. On a Saturday afternoon, sunlight spilled across the warm wooden tables by the window. Children laughed over soft Italian music. A line formed outside not for flash or fame, but for the taste of something they thought was lost. The press called it the miraculous return of a New York culinary icon. But in the kitchen, no one said the word miracle. Leo Vance still stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, gently stirring a pot of tomato sauce like every motion might save a tiny world. In one corner of the kitchen stood a small, hand-carved wooden sign, Leo's Creative Lab. A space where young chefs could experiment with new recipes, especially for guests with illnesses or unique dietary needs. Today, one such guest had arrived, Chloe. She sat by the window, sunlight glowing on her newly regrown hair after rounds of treatment. She was weaker than before, but the spark in her eyes had returned. In front of her, a steaming plate of lasagna di Aurelia, fragrant with basil and fresh cheese. Leo stood nearby, saying nothing, but his heart held its breath. Chloe picked up her fork, twirled a small bite, and brought it to her lips. She closed her eyes. 1 second, 2. Then, a smile. Not a polite one, a wide, beaming, sauce-smeared smile that lit up her entire face. She giggled, and at that moment, the entire restaurant seemed to pause, just to listen to that laugh. Leo bowed his head, gripping the edge of the counter. No one saw, but his shoulders trembled. From a distance, Julian Croft watched. No suit, no assistance, just a man with his hands in his pockets, silently witnessing a quiet kind of miracle. He nodded at Leo, a nod filled with understanding and gratitude. No words, none needed. No one talked about profits, no one showed charts, but everyone knew today Aurelia's legacy has been saved, not on a balance sheet, but on a child's dinner plate. Julian's closing words. Sometimes to save an empire, you don't need a new business strategy. You just need to remember why you started. Some stories don't need a dramatic victory or a shocking twist. Sometimes, all they need is a smile. The story of Julian Croft and Leo Vance isn't about power or wealth. It's a journey back to what matters most: compassion, honor, and family legacy. In a world where everything can be optimized for profit, we often forget that the most precious things, like a meal cooked with love or a child's laughter, can't be measured in dollars. Julian began as a cold executive, a man who believed numbers never lie. But it was Leo's pain, the quiet, unwavering determination of a father who just wanted his daughter to taste something familiar, that woke him up. And that makes us wonder, how many times in our lives have we chosen efficiency over sincerity? Sometimes a small jar of sauce can carry an entire world, memories, unspoken promises, and the soul of someone who's no longer here. And sometimes a child smiling over her favorite dish has more power than any financial report ever could. At Toch Story, we believe in the power of stories like this, stories that make you pause for a few seconds and reflect on how you're living, on how you're loving, on the choices you're making. If something stirred in your heart while listening to this story, even just a little, consider subscribing to Toch Story. We're here to tell you stories that don't shout, but stay with you long after they end. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video if you believe some legacies should never be forgotten. Because sometimes to change the world, you just need to remember why you started. Toch Story. Stories that touch the heart.